Hey guys, I'm Sophie from Lingucast. Make sure to give this video a like if you like it, or lie to us and give us a like anyway. Comment, subscribe, and share with your friends so more people can hear about what we're sharing about language learning.
Largest book on structural ambiguity in English. Is that correct?
I don't know if it's the largest. It's
Like I've seen,
might be the most comprehensive. It's 2 volumes.
I think it's like this thick here. Like it's like this.
Yeah, it's pretty big, and the publisher even made me cut it back. It was a lot longer.
It was.
As they said, no, this is too much. We can't publish books that are this big.
It was like maybe it was like this, and then maybe.
Well, yeah, it was big. I could have said more.
Can you tell us a little bit how structural ambiguity works and how people use it?
Well, I think structural ambiguity is fascinating because it's not just the words that are ambiguous, but it's the structures. And I think it sometimes has an effect on sort of almost stunning people.
Mm-hmm.
It grabs their attention in a way that sometimes other types of ambiguity don't. And to be sure, there's different types, major types of ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
You can have lexical ambiguity. That's where you just have word meaning ambiguity. An example might be he had a date. Does that mean the little piece of, fruit?
Mm-hmm.
Or does that mean, a social occasion with someone? That's a lexical ambiguity. If you diagram the sentence, it'd be the same kind of diagram. It'd be a subject with a verb and a direct object, and date is a noun by either interpretation. And so that's what you get with a lexical ambiguity. We also have things called pragmatic ambiguities, and that's where somebody says something and you understand all the words in it, but you're not quite sure how you're supposed to interpret it. Were they telling you to do something, or were they just informing you of something? And those can be a pragmatic thing. One of the examples I saw from a comedian, I can't remember which comedian, but it showed, I guess the guy was talking about driving up to the border, and you have the checkpoints and the government officials, ask you questions. And one of them there said, do you have any guns? And the guy in there said, oh, yeah, what type would you like to buy? And, the question, do you have any guns? The pragmatics behind it, in the context,
Right.
would normally understand that they're trying to make sure that you're not bringing any guns. He wasn't trying to ask to buy one.
Right.
So when you have questions about the type of speech act involved, or what is the motive behind what's being said and what they're trying to do with what they're saying, and those can be ambiguities. But to focus on the structural ambiguities, which is what I do more of, this is where the actual structures of what you have are ambiguous. You don't know how to put them together. One of the classic examples is old men and women. Does old modify only? Is it describing only the men, or is it also describing and referring to the women? Is it old men and also old women, or just old men and the women aren't old?
Right.
And you get ambiguities. Some of my favorite phrases or clauses for this are, the peasants are revolting, which, revolting could be getting used as a verb or an adjective, and depending on which you have a very different interpretation. Groucho Marx's statement, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he ever got into my pajamas, I'll never know. Where in my pajamas could be describing the elephant, or it could be describing saw, the verb. And, these are all structural ambiguities where you're just not sure of the structure you're dealing with. One of the interesting structural ambiguities I've seen is where you can't be sure if, some verbs are 2-word or 3-word verbs, like put up with is a verb to mean tolerate.
Right.
But there was a sign, allegedly, I don't know if this is true or not, but there was Richard Lederer says this was a sign in a pharmacy. It said, "We dispense with accuracy." And you don't know whether to read as "we dispense with accuracy," meaning very accurate in how we do it.
Uh-huh.
There with would be a preposition introducing a prepositional phrase. Or is it a two-word verb we dispense with accuracy, meaning we get rid of it. We don't care about accuracy. So they're opposite meanings.
Oh.
You get some very interesting things. My brother saw a bumper sticker. He sent me the information from it, the phrase, but it said, "Midwives help people out." To help somebody out means to assist them. But you could be interpreting out not as part of a multi-word verb, but as an adverb.
Right.
Which is what midwives do.
Yes.
Help a baby out of the womb.
Yeah.
And so I think structural ambiguities are really interesting because they sort of engage the brain in a way that I think some other things don't do so much. But and sometimes I think if somebody harnessed them a little better for advertisements, they'd have more memorable lines. Sometimes, Glad Garbage Bags has been using the same structural ambiguity for, 60 years or so. It's where they say, "Don't get mad, get glad." Now, the get could be a linking verb introducing an adjective, saying be happy, or get could be a transitive verb introducing a direct object, meaning glad garbage bags.
Yeah.
Or glad products.
Oh.
And, they often show somebody, they're using a bag, some competitor's brand, and the bottom of the bag breaks out and the garbage goes everywhere and people are all upset. So then they'll say, "Don't get mad, get glad." And so it's a double meaning. It's a structural ambiguity.
Yeah.
And it must be working for them because they're still using it like 60 or 70 years later.
What's wrong?
Now, people assume that these things are just random in the language, but my work in this area shows that they can happen by design.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know the formulas for them, you can create them at will.
Can you give us some formulas about how we can create structural ambiguities?
Yeah, I'll show you a couple here. I think they're really interesting, and I hope I don't get too much in the weeds here. I'll try to show a little bit. And actually, that was the point of my 2-volume work on structural ambiguity, was to outline the way the structure of the language works and how you could deliberately create structural ambiguities. I've done a lot of research to discover the vulnerabilities in the English grammatical system, and I refer to these as vulnerabilities because you like to think that language prevents ambiguity from happening. But what if you want to create it? And I don't mean for deception. I mean for wordplay purposes.
Yeah.
Like, don't get mad, get glad. Nobody's, being tricked into something there. They just see the double meaning.
Right.
They're pleased by it. It engages them in a way. But I was, studying the vulnerabilities in the grammatical system. So I did prepare something on a whiteboard here. I hope you can see this okay. But is that pretty visible?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so if you look at this first sentence, I saw him, and then you look at the next thing, I saw his dog. You'll notice that if we mean the object form, it's him, but if we mean the possessive form, it's his. But look in the next sentence for female third person. I saw her, and then if you show the possessive, it's also her. I saw her dog.
Uh-huh.
So unlike the male, him and his, the female has her for both.
Uh-huh.
That's something I would refer to as a vulnerability.
Interesting.
Because I can create, look at this joke. It was a meme that a student shared with me, and it showed a therapist, like a marriage therapist, working with a couple. And the marriage therapist said, "She says you never buy her flowers." And he says, "I didn't know she was selling any." Now, you might think that's just a random funny thing, but I want you to consider, you never buy her flowers could either mean never buy flowers for her, where for where her is an object form, or you never buy her flowers, which is the way he interprets it, where it's a possessive.
Yeah.
And now, let's say you had done it the other way. If you use the male forms, it won't work because of him and his. So if you said, he says, you never buy him flowers, and then if she said, I didn't know he was selling any, that doesn't work because him and his are different forms of those two notions, whereas her is the same. And that's why you also get things like, there was an old joke, I think, done by Garrison Keillor. It said, did you hear about the Amish couple that got a divorce? It said he was driving her buggy. And if you had reversed it to say she was driving him buggy, it doesn't work.
Right.
Because the two meanings, she was driving him buggy or she was driving his buggy. But her, it works.
Right.
So that's an example of what I would say is a vulnerability. And by the way, I've seen another variation of that. That's one of the things with my research. I went through maybe tens of thousands or maybe more of jokes, things to find some of these things, because I wouldn't just find them described in linguistic books. I would get into the real data. So I was collecting tons and tons of jokes. But there was a George Burns and Gracie Allen routine. They were old comedians, husband and wife team. And in one of the scenes from one of their comedic skits, they had George coming home, and he says, he sees that Gracie, his wife, has these flowers. And he says, Gracie, those are beautiful flowers. Where did you get them? And she said, well, you're the reason I have them, George. And he said, I'm the reason you have those flowers. He said, why? And she said, well, you told me when I went to visit Clara Bagley in the hospital, I should be sure and take her flowers. So when she wasn't looking, I did. And so that was the line. Now notice, in the earlier example, it was buy her flowers. And in this example, it's take her flowers. And so what's going on there? And then you realize that, first of all, the humor in this kind of wordplay depends not only on her being able to be an object form or a possessive form, but you have to have the right type of verb. And I'm not speaking about the semantics. It's like the valency of the verb. Some verbs don't allow any objects. Some verbs allow only one object. Some verbs allow one or two objects. And this is the type of verb you want to get. Because if you say, I bought her flowers, if it's an indirect object, her, and then flowers, the direct object, or her flowers together is one object, and so that has to be a possessive her, it's one object. You have to have a verb that can be either way. And we know what those verbs are. I talk about them in my book. I say, when you make this, you need to use these kind of verbs: buy, or bring, or take, or send, and there's more.
Right.
It won't work with use. Even though that's a transitive verb, it has a direct object. It doesn't allow two objects, and you have to have verbs that allow one or two. So it's like Tinker Toys. If you ever played that when you were a kid, and you had to have, like, you pick up these blocks, and some of them have 2 holes, some of them have 3 holes, some have 4 holes. If you know what you're after, and you say, I'm going to build this, this wordplay, you can go right for the right kind of tools that you need.
Yeah.
You also need to make sure that the thing that occupies the space, like where flowers is, has to be a plural. Because if you said, I bought her a flower, it doesn't work.
Right.
So you have to make it a plural in order for that to work. But anyway, that's one example of how that can be manipulated. Let me show you.